My name is Amelia, and at 27 years old, I thought I had hit rock bottom the night I sat in my car outside a shelter with my feverish baby, turned away because there was no room for us. My family had made it clear I was too much of a disaster to help, too broken to fix, and frankly, not their problem anymore. But then a stranger in a black suit knocked on my car window with an impossible story about an inheritance, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about my past started to unravel. What I discovered in a locked metal box didn't just change my life. It exposed a crime my parents thought they had buried forever and forced me to make a choice between family loyalty and something far more important. If you're watching this right now, I'd love to know where you're from. Drop it in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories. The fluorescent lights of the shelter parking lot buzzed above me like angry wasps as I sat in my car, cradling Lila against my chest. Her tiny body burned with fever, and every whimper that escaped her cracked lips felt like a blade twisting in my gut. The shelter worker had just told me what I already knew deep down. There was no room. Not for us. Not tonight. "I'm sorry, honey," she'd said through my rolled-down window, her eyes genuinely sympathetic, but her hands empty of solutions. "We're completely full. Try the one on Maple Street, but call first." My phone was dead. Had been for 2 days. I nodded, managed some version of thank you, and watched her walk back inside where it was warm, where there were beds and hot meals and people who hadn't been discarded like yesterday's trash. I looked down at Lila, her flushed cheeks and the way her little fists clenched even in sleep, and whispered to the darkness inside my car, "Mom would just say, I brought this on myself." And she would. She had. 2 weeks ago, I'd stood in my parents' kitchen, the kitchen where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to bake cookies and do homework at the counter, and I'd ask them for help. Not money. Not a handout. Just a place to stay while I figured things out. My consulting business had collapsed when my biggest client suddenly filed bankruptcy, taking my invoices with them into the void. I had a baby, no savings left, and pride that was already in tatters. My mother had looked at me like I'd tracked dog waste across her pristine floors. "You're always a disaster, Amelia," she'd said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't even look up from chopping vegetables. "Always have been." My father had set down his newspaper. Actually set it down, like I warranted that much attention, and added in that cold, measured tone he used when he wanted you to know the conversation was over. "We already raised you. You're not our problem anymore." I'd felt Lila's shift in the carrier against my chest, and I turned to my sister Sienna, who was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone. Sienna, who I'd covered for in high school. Sienna, who I'd lent money to when she needed it. Sienna, who was supposed to be my ally in this family of ice sculptures. Sienna? My voice had cracked like a teenager's, pathetic and pleading. She'd finally looked up, but her eyes slid away from mine almost immediately. "I'd help," she muttered, her fingers still moving across her screen, "but I can't risk being dragged into your mess again." "I'm your sister," I'd said, hating how small I sounded. "Lila's your niece." Sienna had stood up, grabbed her purse, and headed for the door. Over her shoulder, she tossed back 2 words that still echoed in my skull. "Not today." But it was my mother's final sentence that had shattered whatever naive hope I'd been clinging to. She'd walked over to me, held out her hand, and said with the warmth of a winter grave, "Leave the keys. And don't come back until you can handle your own life." The house keys. The spare set she'd given me years ago, back when I still believed family meant something. I'd set them on the counter without a word and walked out, Lila pressed against my heart, into a world that suddenly felt enormous and hostile and empty. Now, sitting in this parking lot with my daughter burning up in my arms, I tried to calculate how much money I had left. $43 and some change. Enough for gas, maybe. Enough for baby medicine and diapers if I chose carefully. Not enough for food, but I'd gone hungry before. I could do it again. I shifted Lila to the back seat, arranging her in the nest of blankets I'd created. She stirred but didn't wake, her breathing raspy and uneven. I kissed her forehead and whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep. "I'll fix this. I promise, baby. I'll fix this." As she settled back into fitful sleep, I let myself break down. Just for a minute. Just long enough to whisper the truth into the darkness. I didn't think they'd give up on us that easily. But they had. And here we were. The next morning, I drove to the dollar store with my last few bills clutched in my hand. I stood in the medicine aisle for 10 minutes, comparing prices, trying to make the math work. Infant fever reducer, diapers, maybe a can of formula. My own stomach growled, but I ignored it. I'd been ignoring it. At the register, the cashier, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a name tag that read Gloria, rang up my items. When I handed her the money, she paused, then reached under the counter and pulled out another bottle of medicine. "You dropped this earlier," she said, sliding it into my bag. I hadn't dropped anything. We both knew it. "I can't," I started, but she cut me off with a look that was pure steel wrapped in kindness. "You dropped it," she repeated firmly. "Have a good day, honey." I walked out of that store with tears streaming down my face, clutching that bag like it contained diamonds. It was the first act of genuine kindness I'd received in months, and it nearly broke me. Back in the parking lot, as I was loading the bags into my car, I felt someone watching me. I turned and saw an elderly man in a wheelchair parked near the entrance. He was staring at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle, like he was trying to solve a puzzle written on my face. Our eyes met, and he gave me a small, deliberate nod. I froze. Did I know him? Something about his face tugged at my memory, but I couldn't place it. Before I could think too hard about it, his caregivers started wheeling him toward a van, and the moment passed. Probably nothing. Just another stranger witnessing my slow-motion disaster. That night, thunderstorms rolled in like divine punishment. I drove under a bridge and parked, trying to create some illusion of shelter. Rain hammered on the roof. Lila cried for hours, her fever still high despite the medicine. I wrapped her in my cardigan, the only warm thing I had left, and held her against my chest, rocking and whispering and praying to a God I wasn't sure was listening. "I'll fix this," I told her, my voice hoarse. "I have to." Somewhere around dawn, the rain stopped. Lila finally fell into a deeper sleep, and I dozed off holding her, my back screaming from the awkward position, my mind too exhausted to dream. I woke to knocking. Sharp, professional, insistent knocking on my car window. I jerked upright, disoriented, clutching Lila protectively. A man in a black suit stood outside my car, holding a leather portfolio. He was middle-aged, well-groomed, and completely out of place in this location. I cracked the window an inch, my heart hammering. "What do you want?" He didn't smile, but his expression was neutral, not threatening. "Miss Amelia Grant." Ice flooded my veins. How did he know my name? Was this about debts? Had I broken some law by sleeping in my car? Was he going to take Lila away? "Who's asking?" I managed. He reached into his jacket, I flinched, and pulled out a business card, sliding it through the window gap. "My name is Daniel Rowan. I'm an attorney." He paused, watching my face carefully. "And I've been looking for you." I stared at the business card like it might explode. Daniel Rowan, attorney at law. A downtown address I recognized as expensive. Gold embossed lettering. "If this is about debt collectors," I said, my voice shaking, "I don't have anything left to take." I started the engine. My hands trembled on the wheel. "Ms. Grant, wait." His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You are not in trouble. I'm not here to serve you papers. Someone left something behind for you." I paused, my foot hovering over the gas. "Left something?" "An inheritance," he said. "A substantial one. And I need to speak with you about it." This had to be a scam. Some sick scheme to prey on desperate people. I'd heard about things like this: identity theft rings, fake lawyers, people who promised miracles and delivered nightmares. "I don't know anyone with money," I said flatly. "Edward Hale," Daniel said. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Edward Hale. The name hit me like a punch to the chest, and suddenly I was 19 years old again, standing outside a cafe during a snowstorm. A man had collapsed on the sidewalk, clutching his chest. Everyone else had walked past him. It was a rough neighborhood. People minded their business. But I'd stopped. I'd called 911. I'd stayed with him, holding his hand and talking to him until the paramedics arrived, telling him to hold on, that help was coming. He looked at me with watery blue eyes and whispered, "Thank you. What's your name?" "Amelia," I'd told him. "Just Edward," he'd replied. And then they'd taken him away, and I'd gone back to my shift at the cafe, and I'd never seen him again. I struggled to form words. I helped someone named Edward once, years ago, but I don't know if. "It's him," Daniel said. "And he never forgot you. Miss Grant, I really need you to come with me to my office. There are documents you need to see." Lila stirred in the back seat, making a small sound. I looked at her, then at this stranger in his expensive suit with his impossible story, and I made a decision born of desperation and the tiny, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, the universe didn't hate me after all. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll follow you." An hour later, I sat in a marble office that smelled like leather and old money. The building had a doorman. The elevator had mirrors. I'd caught a glimpse of myself in one, hollow-eyed, unwashed, wearing clothes I'd slept in for 3 days, and I'd wanted to disappear. But Daniel's assistant had brought me coffee and a warm muffin, and when I'd started crying over the simple kindness of it, she just squeezed my shoulder and said, "Take your time, honey." Now, Daniel sat across from me at a massive mahogany desk. Behind him hung a portrait of an elderly man with kind eyes and silver hair. I recognized those eyes. They were the same ones that had looked at me from that snowy sidewalk 8 years ago. "Edward Hale," Daniel began, "was one of the wealthiest men in this state. He built a tech empire from nothing, retired at 60, and spent the last decade of his life doing quiet philanthropy. He died 3 months ago at the age of 78. I nodded, not sure where this was going. Daniel opened a folder and pulled out a document. "This is his last will and testament. I'm going to read you the relevant section." He cleared his throat and read, "To the young woman who once saved my life when she had nothing to gain, to the girl who held my hand in the snow and called for help when everyone else walked by, I leave my entire estate to Amelia Grant." The world tilted. "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Your entire estate?" I repeated, my voice rising. "This is a mistake. This has to be a mistake." I'm not. "Mr. Hale was very specific," Daniel said. "He left personal instructions. He hired investigators to find you. It took years, but he was determined." "Why?" I felt like I was drowning. I just called 911. Anyone would have done that. "You'd be surprised how many people didn't," Daniel said quietly. "And you stayed. You held his hand. You told him he'd be okay. He said you gave him something to fight for in that moment." Tears were streaming down my face now, and I couldn't stop them. "I don't understand." Before Daniel could respond, the office doors burst open. 3 people stormed in, 2 men in suits and a woman in designer clothes, all of them radiating fury. "Is this her?" The woman spat, looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "Is this the nobody who thinks she can steal our inheritance?" Daniel stood up, his expression hardening. "Mr. Hale's children. I was expecting you." "Her," one of the men shouted, pointing at me. "She's nobody. She's nothing. You can't possibly expect us to believe." "The will is ironclad," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the noise. "I drafted it myself. Your father was of sound mind. He knew exactly what he was doing." The woman turned on me, her eyes blazing. "What did you do? Did you seduce him? Manipulate him? What kind of con are you running?" I shrank back in my chair, holding Lila tighter. "I didn't do anything. I don't even know why I'm here." "You're here," Daniel said firmly, "because Edward Hale wanted you to be. And unless you can prove undue influence, which you can't, this will stand." The 3 of them argued, threatened, and eventually stormed out, promising legal battles and public exposure. Through it all, I just sat there, numb, trying to process any of this. When they were gone, Daniel sat back down and pulled out a handwritten letter. "He left this for you. He said you should read it alone, but I think now is the right time." My hands shook as I took it. The paper was expensive, the handwriting shaky but clear. Dear Amelia, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Daniel has finally found you. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry I wasn't able to thank you in person. That night in the snow, you saved my life. Not just because you called for help, but because you reminded me that kindness still existed. I was in a dark place back then. I'd lost my wife. My children had become strangers to me, waiting for me to die so they could claim their inheritance. I'd been walking in that storm, half hoping I'd just disappear into it. And then I collapsed.
And you stopped.
You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask for anything. You just helped. I've spent years searching for you, Amelia. I wanted to find you sooner, but life got complicated. When I finally did, I discovered that the world hadn't been kind to you. I'm sorry for that too. You were the only person that night who didn't take advantage of me, who didn't see dollar signs or opportunities. You just saw another human being who needed help. And now I hope I can help you. I hope this inheritance gives you the life you deserve. I hope it saves you the way you saved me. Use it well. Use it wisely. And know that somewhere, an old man is grateful you exist. Edward. I broke down completely. Not because of the money, I still couldn't process that part, but because a stranger, someone I'd helped once for 5 minutes 8 years ago, had cared more about my life than my own family ever had. Daniel waited patiently until I could breathe again. Then, he slid a set of keys across the desk. The penthouse is ready for you, he said. Fully furnished. All utilities paid. There are accounts you can access immediately for food, medical care, anything you need. We'll handle the full estate transfer over the next few weeks, but the emergency access is available now. I stared at the keys. They felt impossibly heavy. There's one more thing, Daniel said. He reached under his desk and pulled out a metal lockbox, setting it between us with a soft thud. Mr. Hale's final request was that only you open this. Alone. When you're ready. I looked at the box. Something about it made my skin prickle. What's in it? I whispered. I don't know, Daniel said. He sealed it himself. But he said it was important. He said it would explain everything. The penthouse was like stepping into a dream, or maybe a stranger's life. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The furniture was modern but comfortable. The kitchen was bigger than my entire first apartment. There was a nursery already set up, with a crib that probably cost more than my car. I laid Lila down in that crib, on sheets softer than anything I'd ever owned, and I watched her sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks. With proper heat. In a safe place. Without the sound of rain on metal, or the fear of someone knocking on my window. You're safe now, baby, I whispered, stroking her soft hair. We're safe. But even as I said it, my eyes kept drifting to the metal lockbox sitting on the dining room table where I'd left it. Edward's letter had said to open it when I was calm. I wasn't calm. I was terrified, exhausted, overwhelmed, and so many other things. But I also knew I wouldn't sleep until I knew what was inside. I made myself tea in the enormous kitchen, using a kettle I had to Google how to operate. I sat at the table. I stared at the box for what felt like hours. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a USB drive, several manila folders, and a stack of photographs held together with a rubber band. I picked up the photos first. The first one made my blood run cold. It was a picture of me as a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a pink dress I vaguely remembered. I was standing in our old backyard, the one we'd lived in before we moved across the state when I was 9. But that wasn't what made my hand shake. In the background, partially obscured by a tree, was Edward Hale. Younger, healthier, but unmistakably him. He'd known me? He'd known my family? I flipped through the other photos with growing dread. Edward, at some kind of company event. My parents in the crowd. My father shaking Edward's hand. More pictures from what looked like a corporate retreat. My mother holding me as a toddler, standing next to Edward and a group of people in business attire. My parents had worked for him. I grabbed the folders with trembling hands. Inside were documents, old employment records, financial statements, pages and pages of numbers and dates that I could barely process. But one thing became clear as I read. My parents had embezzled money from Edward Hale's company. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over several years, carefully siphoned through fake vendor accounts and ghost employees. And they'd framed someone else for it. A sticky note in Edward's handwriting was attached to one page. Martin Reyes, accountant, good man, lost everything because of their lies. I felt sick. I kept reading. There were bank statements showing large deposits into my parents' accounts during those years. Transfers that coincided with the missing money. Emails that had been recovered, showing my father coordinating with my mother about cleaning up the numbers and making sure it points away from us. And a handwritten letter from Edward tucked into the back of the folder. Amelia, I struggled with whether to tell you this. You were just a child when it happened, and it's not your burden to carry. But I also believe you deserve to know the truth about the people who raised you. Your parents betrayed me 20 years ago. They stole from my company, destroyed a good man's career to cover their tracks, and disappeared before I could press charges. I knew it was them. I've always known, but they'd covered their tracks well enough that I couldn't prove it. Not definitively. Not in a way that would hold up in court. When I found you again and learned you had a daughter, I also learned how your parents treated you. How they blamed you for things. How they pushed you away when you needed help. I suspect they've been pushing you away your whole life, Amelia. Because as long as you were kept at arm's length, you couldn't ask questions about their past. About where their money came from. About why you moved so suddenly when you were young. If this reaches you, I trust you'll do the right thing. Not for revenge, but for justice. For Martin Reyes, who lost his career and his reputation. And for yourself, because you deserve to know the truth. Edward. I sat there as the sun set, staring at these documents, my entire childhood reorganizing itself in my mind. The sudden move across states when I was 9. Fresh start, they'd called it. The way my father always yelled about money, but we never seemed to actually struggle. My mother's paranoia about people asking questions, about keeping family business private. The way they'd always made me feel like I was the problem, too loud, too messy, too much to handle. Too risky to have around. They hadn't just abandoned me when I needed help. They'd been distancing themselves from me my entire life, making sure I never got close enough to see what they really were. I found a USB drive in the box and plugged it into the laptop that had been left for me. A single video file. I clicked play. Edward appeared on screen, sitting in a chair, looking frail but clear-eyed. This was recent, maybe weeks before he died. Amelia, he said, his voice weak but steady. If you're watching this, you've seen the documents. You know what your parents did. He coughed, took a sip of water. I want you to understand something. This isn't about revenge. Revenge is poison. But justice is medicine. Martin Reyes lost 20 years of his career because of their lies. He was blacklisted. He lost his home. His marriage fell apart. All because your parents needed a scapegoat. Edward leaned forward, his eyes intense despite his age. I'm giving you the tools to make this right. Not because I want to hurt your parents. They've done enough damage to themselves. But because the truth deserves to come out. Because Martin deserves his name cleared. And because you, Amelia, deserve to know that you came from better than them. The video ended. I sat in the dark of that beautiful penthouse, surrounded by wealth I'd never imagined, holding evidence of crimes I'd never suspected, and I felt a rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just anger at what they'd done to Edward or Martin. Anger at what they'd done to me. They'd stolen money and destroyed a man's life. And then they'd looked at their own daughter like she was a burden, a risk, something to be kept at a distance, and eventually discarded when she became too inconvenient. Flashbacks flooded my mind. My father screaming when unexpected bills arrived. My mother hissing, "Don't ask questions," whenever I wondered about our old life. The way they'd moved us across state lines in the middle of the night, telling me it was an adventure. They hadn't abandoned me because I was difficult. They'd abandoned me because I was a loose end. Because the closer I got, the more chance I might stumble onto the truth they'd buried. I looked at Lila, sleeping peacefully in the next room, and I thought about what kind of example I wanted to set for her. What kind of woman I wanted her to see when she looked at her mother. I couldn't let this go. I wouldn't. I picked up my phone, now charged, and called Daniel. "I need to meet with you tomorrow," I said when he answered. "There's something I need to do." "Are you alright?" he asked. I looked at the evidence spread across my table.
No.
"But I will be." I hung up and walked to the window, looking out over the city lights. My parents were out there somewhere, probably sleeping peacefully, thinking they'd gotten away with everything. They were wrong. I whispered to my reflection in the glass. It ends with me. Not with revenge. Not with cruelty. With the truth. With justice. With making sure that what they did to me, to Martin, to Edward, it would never happen to anyone else. Daniel's office felt different this time. Maybe because I was different. I wasn't the desperate, broken woman who'd stumbled in here a week ago. I'd slept in a real bed. I'd fed my daughter and myself. And I'd spent 3 days going through every document in that lockbox until I understood exactly what my parents had done. Now I sat across from Daniel with a retired investigator named Marcus Finn, a man Edward had trusted, according to his notes. Marcus was in his 60s, built like he'd been military, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I've reviewed everything you sent over," Marcus said, tapping the folder in front of him. "The embezzlement trail is clear if you know what you're looking for. Your parents were clever, but not clever enough. The problem is, it's old. 20 years old. Statutes of limitation are an issue." My heart sank. "So, they get away with it?" "I didn't say that," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "Financial crimes that involve ongoing concealment can have extended limitations. If they've continued to hide the money, continue to benefit from it, that's a different story. Plus, there's the fraud angle, framing Martin Reyes. That's a separate crime." Daniel leaned forward. "The challenge is building a case that the district attorney will actually prosecute. We need more than old documents. We need current evidence. Proof that they're still hiding assets from this theft." "Then we find it," I said firmly. Marcus studied me. "You understand what you're starting here? Once this moves forward, there's no stopping it. Your parents could face serious prison time. Your family will be torn apart. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Lila sleeping in her car seat while I'd begged my mother for help. I thought about Martin Reyes, whose life had been destroyed for crimes he didn't commit. I thought about Edward, who'd carried this knowledge for 20 years. They tore my family apart the day they decided money was more important than integrity, I said. "I'm just bringing it into the light." Marcus nodded slowly. "All right then. Let's start with Martin Reyes." 2 days later, I stood outside a rundown apartment complex on the east side of the city. Marcus had tracked Martin down. He was living alone, working odd jobs, barely scraping by. My parents had taken everything from this man, and he'd never recovered. I knocked on his door, my heart pounding. The man who answered was in his 60s, thin and tired-looking, with gray hair and wary eyes. "Can I help you, Mr. Reyes?" "My name is Amelia Grant." I watched his expression carefully. "I need to talk to you about Edward Hale and what happened 20 years ago." His face went pale. For a moment, I thought he might close the door. Instead, he stepped back. "You better come in." His apartment was small but neat. Photos on the walls showed happier times. A younger Martin with a woman and 2 kids, graduation pictures, family vacations. All from before. "How do you know Edward?" he asked, sitting heavily in an armchair. "He left me his estate," I said. "And evidence about what really happened to you." Martin's hands trembled. "Evidence?" I pulled out copies of the documents. I wasn't going to show him everything, not yet, but enough. Enough to show him that I believed him. That someone finally believed him. As he read, tears started rolling down his weathered face. "I told them I was innocent," he whispered. "I told everyone. My wife, my kids, my lawyer. No one listened. They said the evidence was clear. That I'd stolen from the company and tried to cover it up. I know," I said quietly. "And I'm going to prove it." He looked up at me, confusion mixing with hope. "Why would you do that?" "Because the people who framed you are my parents," I said. "And they don't get to destroy lives and walk away." Martin broke down completely then, and I sat with him while he cried, for the lost years, for the destroyed reputation, for the family that had never quite believed him and had slowly drifted away. When he could speak again, he asked, "What do you need from me?" "Your story, your records, anything you remember from that time, and your willingness to testify, if it comes to that." "I kept everything," he said. "Every document from my case. I always knew someone set me up. I just couldn't prove it." He pulled out boxes from a closet, legal files, employment records, handwritten notes from his own investigation that had gone nowhere. We spent the next 3 hours going through it all, and with every page, the picture became clearer. My parents had been meticulous in their theft but sloppy in their frame-up. They needed a scapegoat fast, and they'd chosen Martin because he was thorough, had access, and wouldn't be suspected until it was too late. When I finally left, Martin walked me to my car. "Miss Grant, Amelia, thank you. Even if nothing comes of this, thank you for believing me. Something will come of it, I promised. You'll get your life back." I drove away with tears in my eyes and steel in my spine. Over the next week, I assembled a legal team using Edward's resources. The lawyers were expensive, thorough, and initially skeptical. But as they reviewed the evidence, their skepticism turned to grim determination. "This is going to be big," the lead attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, told me. "Once we file, it's going to explode. The media will be all over it. Your parents will fight back hard. Are you ready?" "I'm ready," I said. But first I needed to see them. I needed to look them in the eye knowing what I knew, and I needed to see if they'd give me anything else to use against them. I called my mother from a burner phone Marcus had given me. "Amelia?" She sounded shocked. "Where have you been?" "I'm back on my feet," I said neutrally. "I wanted to stop by. Talk." There was a long pause. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Please, Mom. I just want to see you. I'm doing better now." Another pause. Then reluctantly, "Fine. Sunday. 2 o'clock. Don't be late." Sunday afternoon, I pulled up to my parents' house in my new car, nothing too flashy but nice. I'd dressed well. I looked healthy, put together, successful. I wanted them to see the change. My mother opened the door, and her eyes went straight to the car, then to my clothes, narrowing with suspicion. "Where did you get the money for all this?" "I got a consulting contract." I lied smoothly. "A good one. Can I come in?" She stepped aside reluctantly. My father was in the living room, and his reaction was similar. Immediate suspicion, barely masked hostility. "What do you want?" he asked bluntly. "I wanted to tell you I'm okay," I said, sitting down uninvited. "That Lila's okay. I thought you might care." My mother's laugh was bitter. "If you're here looking for an apology, you won't get one. We gave you everything growing up. It's not our fault you couldn't make it work." I smiled, and it must have been unsettling because they both shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, I'm doing great now," I said. "Funny how things work out." Then, I dropped the name I'd been saving. "I met someone interesting recently. Edward Hale. Well, his estate attorney, anyway." The change was instantaneous. My father's face went gray. My mother's coffee cup rattled against its saucer. "What?" My father's voice was barely above a whisper. "Edward Hale," I repeated, watching them carefully. "You remember him, right? You used to work for his company." "That was a long time ago," my mother said quickly. "Why would you? How do you know about that?" "Oh, he remembered me," I said casually. "Isn't that strange? He left me something in his will." My father stood up abruptly, his hands shaking. "You need to leave." "Already?" I checked my watch, a nice one. I'd made sure they'd notice. "I just got here. Get out." My mother's voice was ice cold. "Now." I stood, still smiling. "It was good seeing you both. We should do this again sometime." As I walked to the door, I heard my mother hiss, "What does she know?" I left before they could say anything else, my heart pounding with triumph. The bracelet Marcus had given me, expensive-looking, elegant, and containing a high-quality recording device, had captured everything. Back in my car, I played it back. After I'd left, they'd started talking immediately. "She knows," my father's panicked voice. "She can't." There's no way. Edward's dead, but if he left her something, documents, evidence. We burned everything. We were careful. Were we? It's been 20 years. What if? We have to hide everything. The offshore accounts, the recording cut off as they moved to another room. But it was enough. More than enough. I drove to Patricia's office and played her the recording. Her eyes lit up. That's consciousness of guilt. They're panicking. They know they're caught. What's next? I asked. Now we hand this to the district attorney along with everything else. And we let the system do its job. That night, I stood on my penthouse balcony, looking out at the city lights. Lila was asleep. The evidence was being reviewed by prosecutors. And somewhere out there, my parents were probably destroying documents and making panic phone calls. I whispered to the night air, "They're scared now. And they should be." But I felt no joy in it. Just a grim sense of purpose. This wasn't about revenge. This was about making sure that people who thought they could buy their way out of consequences, who thought they could destroy lives and walk away, those people learned they were wrong. I thought about Edward's letter, about Martin's tears, about every time my parents had made me feel small and worthless, and like I was the problem. And I thought about Lila, who would grow up knowing her mother stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. We're going to finish this, I told the city. And we're going to do it right. Patricia Chin sat across from me in her glass-walled conference room, her fingers steepled as she listened to the recording for the third time. When my parents' panicked voices faded, "We have to hide everything." She leaned back with a smile that could cut steel. "This is gold," she said, her eyes gleaming. "They know they're guilty. They're scared. And they incriminated themselves beautifully. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was holding the power instead of being crushed by it. What happens now? Now we bury them in evidence they can't explain away. Over the next 72 hours, Patricia's team worked like surgical instruments, dissecting my parents' financial history. They found what Marcus had suspected. The money hadn't just disappeared into the past. My parents had been smart enough to move it, hide it, launder it through shell companies with names like Cascade Holdings and Riverstone Investments. But they hadn't been smart enough to cover every trail. Look at this. Patricia's forensic accountant, a quiet man named David who spoke in numbers the way poets spoke in verse, showed me a spreadsheet that meant nothing to me, but everything to him. These transfers here, and here, and here. They all route back to accounts your parents opened right after they left Edward Hale's company. The timing is damning. Can we prove it came from the embezzlement? I asked. With the documentation Edward saved? Absolutely. Every dollar has a paper trail, if you know where to look. Meanwhile, in a house across town, my parents were unraveling. I knew this because Marcus had quietly placed surveillance, legal surveillance, he'd assured me, on their property. Not cameras, but monitoring of their communications, their movements, their obvious panic. "Your mother called 3 lawyers yesterday," Marcus reported during one of our morning briefings. "All criminal defense attorneys. All expensive. And my father? Went to the bank twice in one day. Tried to access a safety deposit box. Got denied because they'd flagged his account for suspicious activity after our inquiry started. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt something colder. Sadder. They're scrambling. They're terrified," Marcus corrected. "And people make mistakes when they're terrified." The next mistake came from an unexpected source, Sienna. She showed up at my penthouse unannounced, somehow talking her way past building security by claiming to be my sister. When I opened the door, she looked different, smaller somehow, her usual polish cracked around the edges. "Amelia," she said, and her voice wobbled. "Can we talk?" I let her in, but I didn't offer her coffee or a seat. I just stood there, waiting. "I know something's happening," she started, wringing her hands. "Mom and Dad are acting crazy. They're fighting all the time. Dad's drinking again. Mom keeps asking me if you've contacted me, what you've said, what you know." "And what did you tell her?" Sienna's eyes filled with tears. "I told her I haven't heard from you since you got kicked out. But Amelia, what's going on?" Did you find something? Something about Mom and Dad. I studied my sister carefully. Was this genuine concern, or was she fishing for information to report back? The recorder Marcus had given me, a different one this time, disguised as a pen in my pocket, was running. Why would you think I found something? I asked carefully. Because you're here. She gestured around the penthouse. In a place like this. Driving a new car. Looking like you've got money. Where did it come from? Does it matter? It matters if it has something to do with them. Her voice rose. Amelia, they're my parents too. If they did something, if you know something, I deserve to know. You deserve to know? The words came out harder than I intended. When I was sleeping in my car with a sick baby, did I deserve your help then? When I begged you, when I told you Lila was your niece, did I deserve basic human decency? Sienna flinched. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But I'm here now. You're here because you're scared, I said quietly. You're scared of what I might know and what it might mean for you. Not because you suddenly care about me. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. Go home, Sienna. Tell Mom and Dad whatever you want. It won't change what's coming. She left in tears, and I felt nothing but exhaustion. That night, I made a decision. I needed to see Martin Reyes again, not for evidence, but to remind myself why I was doing this. Because on the hardest days, when I questioned whether destroying my family was worth it, I needed to remember the other lives my parents had destroyed. Martin's apartment felt even smaller the second time, but warmer somehow. He'd made tea, set out cookies, the kind that come in packages from discount stores, but offered with the dignity of a man who had little left but his integrity. I've been following the news, he said carefully. Well, not the news exactly. But I have a friend who knows people. He says there's talk about reopening old cases. It's more than talk, I told him. The district attorney is reviewing everything. They're taking it seriously. His hands trembled around his teacup. After 20 years. After I lost everything. They're finally listening. I'm sorry it took this long, I said. I'm sorry it took a stranger's inheritance and a daughter's betrayal to make it happen. Don't apologize for doing the right thing. Martin set down his cup. You know what the worst part was? Not the job. Not even the money, though God knows that was hard. It was the doubt. My own wife looked at me and wondered if maybe I really had done it. My kids grew up with a father who was branded a thief. That's what your parents took from me. My own certainty about who I was. Tears burned my eyes. You're going to get it back. Your name, your reputation, all of it. Because of you, he said softly. You didn't have to do this. You could have taken the money and run. No, I said. I couldn't. Not, and still look my daughter in the eye someday. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people broken by the same crime, both trying to find their way toward healing. When I got home, there was a message from Patricia. DA wants to meet. Tomorrow.
10 Uhr morgens.
We're moving forward. I called Marcus. My parents will know soon. Once the DA starts official proceedings. They probably already suspect, Marcus said. Your sister's visit? She went straight to their house afterward. Stayed for 3 hours. I'd expected that. Then let them prepare. Let them hire the best lawyers money can buy. It won't matter. You sound confident. I am, I said. Because we have the truth. And the truth is louder than money. The next morning, I sat in the district attorney's office with Patricia beside me and Marcus standing near the wall like a silent guardian. The DA, a woman named Rebecca Torres with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen everything, laid out a series of folders. Ms. Grant, I've reviewed your evidence. All of it. And I'm prepared to move forward with charges. My heart hammered. What kind of charges? Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and perjury related to the original investigation. If we can prove they knew Martin Reyes was innocent and deliberately framed him, we may add obstruction of justice. Will it stick? I asked. Rebecca's smile was grim. With what you've given me? Yes. But I need you to understand something. This will be public. Your parents will fight. The media will make you into either a hero or a villain depending on the day. Your family will fracture, probably permanently. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Lila, sleeping peacefully in a safe home. I thought about Martin crying over finally being believed. I thought about Edward, who'd trusted me with this responsibility. I'm prepared, I said. Then let's bring them in. 2 days later, I watched from Patricia's office as the news broke. Not the arrests, those would come, but the investigation. Someone had leaked it to the press, and suddenly my parents' names were everywhere, connected to a 20-year-old scandal involving a beloved philanthropist's company. My phone exploded with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Reporters, old acquaintances, people who'd ignored me for years suddenly desperate for information. I ignored them all except one. Sienna's text was short. How could you do this to us? I replied, I didn't do this. They did. 20 years ago. She didn't respond. That night, alone in my penthouse with Lila sleeping in the next room, I allowed myself one moment of doubt. One moment of wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. If maybe I should have just taken the money and disappeared, let the past stay buried. Then I remembered my mother's voice. You're always a disaster. My father's coldness. You're not our problem anymore. The way they'd thrown me away like garbage when I needed them most. And I remembered that they'd done the same thing to Martin, to Edward, to anyone who got in the way of their greed. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. They're scared now, I whispered to my reflection. And they should be. Tomorrow, the trap would close completely. Tomorrow, the arrests would happen. Tonight, I let myself feel everything. The grief, the anger, the bone-deep exhaustion of going to war with your own blood. And then I went to check on my daughter, kissed her forehead, and reminded myself why some battles have to be fought, even when they break your heart. The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning, quiet and professional, exactly as Rebecca Torres had promised. But nothing about the aftermath was quiet. Patricia called me at 7 a.m. They picked up your parents an hour ago. Separate locations. Your mother was at home. Your father was trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. I closed my eyes. He was running. Makes him look guilty as hell, which helps us. The arraignment is this afternoon. You don't have to be there. I'll be there, I said. The courthouse was a circus. News vans lined the street. Reporters shouted questions at anyone who looked remotely connected to the case. I arrived through a side entrance with Patricia, but even then, cameras caught us. I kept my head down, held tight to my purse, and said nothing. Inside, the courtroom felt like a cage. Cold marble, hard benches, the smell of old wood and older lies. I sat in the back with Patricia beside me, Marcus somewhere behind us, and waited. When they brought my parents in, I barely recognized them. My mother looked 10 years older, her makeup smeared, her designer clothes wrinkled. She scanned the courtroom frantically until her eyes found mine. The hatred in her gaze could have melted steel. My father looked destroyed, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. All his cold superiority crumbled into ash. The judge read the charges. The words felt unreal: embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Each charge another nail in a coffin they'd built themselves. Their lawyer, expensive, slick, exactly who you'd hire if you were guilty and desperate, argued for bail. My clients are pillars of the community, Your Honor. They have deep roots here, no criminal history. Rebecca stood up. Your Honor, Mr. Grant was apprehended attempting to flee the country. He had one-way tickets to a nation with no extradition treaty. Mrs. Grant has been systematically moving assets into offshore accounts for the past 2 weeks. These are not people with roots. These are people planning to run. The judge's expression hardened. Bail is set at $500,000 each. Surrender of passports. House arrest with electronic monitoring. My mother actually gasped. My father just stared at his hands. As they were let out, my mother hissed at me. You traitor. You ungrateful little traitor. I met her eyes and said nothing. What was there to say? Outside, the media descended like locusts. Patricia had prepared me, But nothing really prepares you for a dozen microphones shoved in your face and strangers shouting questions about your family. Ms. Grant, did you know your parents were criminals? How does it feel to turn in your own family? Is it true you inherited millions from Edward Hale? Are you doing this for revenge or justice? Patricia pulled me through the crowd and into a waiting car. As we drove away, I saw Sienna on the courthouse steps, crying into her phone, surrounded by reporters. She'll blame you, Patricia said quietly. People always blame the messenger. I know. The next few days were a blur of depositions, evidence reviews, and media scrutiny. The story had everything people loved: wealth, betrayal, family drama, a decades-old crime finally coming to light. I became a figure in a narrative I didn't control, either the brave daughter seeking justice or the vindictive child destroying her parents for money. The truth, as always, was more complicated. What I hadn't expected was the flood of support. Former employees of Edward's company came forward with their own stories of suspecting my parents, but being too afraid to speak. People who'd worked with Martin reached out to say they'd never believed he was guilty. And then there were the others, people who'd been hurt by my parents in smaller ways over the years. A contractor they'd refused to pay. A neighbor they'd sued over petty disputes. A colleague my father had undermined to steal a promotion. Your parents made a lot of enemies, Marcus said, showing me the file of potential witnesses. People are lining up to testify. But the most important witness was still Martin. I met him at Patricia's office the day before his deposition. He looked nervous but determined, wearing a suit that was too big for him now, probably from when he'd had a career worth dressing for. Thank you for doing this, I said. I've waited 20 years to tell the truth, Martin replied. Nothing's going to stop me now. His deposition was powerful. He walked through the timeline of his framing with painful precision, how documents had been altered, how he'd been called into meetings and blindsided with accusations, how his protests of innocence had been ignored. When he described losing his wife, his voice broke. She believed me at first, he said quietly. But when nobody else did, when the evidence seemed so clear, she started to doubt. That's what killed our marriage. Not the job loss. Not the money. The doubt. The defense attorney tried to shake him, tried to suggest he was just bitter, looking for someone to blame after all these years. But Martin was unshakable. I've had 20 years to be angry, he said. And I am angry. But I'm also telling the truth, and the evidence proves it. He was right. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showing my parents depositing amounts that matched the missing funds. Emails recovered from old servers showing them discussing the frame-up. The shell companies they'd created. The offshore accounts they'd opened right after fleeing Edward's company. And through it all, the recording I'd made of them panicking when I mentioned Edward's name. Their own voices condemning them. We have to hide everything. Rebecca was building a case so airtight that my parents' expensive lawyers started talking about plea deals. They want to negotiate, Patricia told me over coffee in her office. Reduce charges in exchange for returning the money and cooperating fully. What does that mean for Martin? Full exoneration. Public acknowledgement that he was framed. Probably financial compensation for lost wages and damages. I wanted that for him. God, I wanted that. But what about prison time? I asked. Patricia's expression was careful. With a plea deal? Probably minimal. Maybe none, depending on what they negotiate. No. The word came out harder than I intended. No deals. They destroyed Martin's entire life. They were ready to let him die thinking everyone believed he was a thief. They don't get to walk away because they're sorry they got caught. Amelia, I understand your feelings, but... This isn't about my feelings, I interrupted. This is about justice. Real justice. If they plead guilty, if they allocate, tell the court exactly what they did, then fine. But no reduced charges. No time served. They face the full consequences. Patricia studied me for a long moment. You're sure? Because a trial is risky. They could drag this out for years. The media coverage will be brutal. Every detail of your life will be examined. I'm sure, I said. Some things are worth fighting for. The trial was set for 6 months out. In the meantime, my parents remained under house arrest, their assets frozen, their reputations in ruins. And I tried to build something resembling a normal life. I restarted my consulting business, using Edward's resources to do it right this time. But I didn't just rebuild what I'd lost, I transformed it. I hired single mothers who'd been written off as unreliable. I hired formerly incarcerated people who couldn't get second chances elsewhere. I paid fair wages and offered childcare assistance and proved that doing business ethically didn't mean doing it poorly. Lila thrived. With stability, healthcare, and a mother who wasn't constantly terrified, she blossomed into a happy, giggling baby who didn't remember those dark days in the car. And slowly, carefully, I started to heal. But the wound of family, that took longer. Sienna tried to reconcile once. She showed up at my office unannounced, her eyes red from crying. "They're my parents," she said, her voice breaking. "I know what they did was wrong, but they're still my parents. Can't you understand that?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone I used to know. Someone I'd loved. Someone I'd lost long before the arrests. "I understand," I said quietly. "But understanding doesn't change what has to happen." "They could go to prison for years," she whispered. "Decades, maybe. And you're okay with that?" "I'm not okay with any of this, Sienna. But I'm also not going to pretend they're victims. They made choices. They destroyed lives. And they have to face that. Even if it destroys our family?" I thought about sitting in my car with a feverish baby, begging for help. I thought about my mother's cold dismissal. My father's cruelty. The way they'd thrown me away, without a second thought. "They destroyed our family a long time ago," I said. "I'm just making sure everyone else knows it." Sienna left, and we haven't spoken since. Some fractures can't be healed. Some families are better left broken. 6 months passed in a blur of legal preparations, media storms, and the slow, painful process of learning to live without the weight of my parents' expectations and disappointments crushing me. And then, finally, the trial began. The courtroom was packed on the first day of trial. Media, curious onlookers, former employees of Edward's company. Martin sat in the front row with his lawyer, his face a mask of controlled emotion. And in the defendant's chair sat my parents, looking smaller somehow, diminished by their own choices. I took my seat in the gallery, Patricia beside me, and prepared to watch my family's final destruction. Rebecca's opening statement was surgical. She laid out the crime in clear, precise language, how my parents had systematically stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars, how they'd covered their tracks, how they'd deliberately framed an innocent man to protect themselves. "This isn't just about money," she told the jury. "This is about two people who decided their greed was more important than another man's life. Who decided that destroying someone's reputation, his career, his marriage, all of that was acceptable collateral damage in their pursuit of wealth." The defense attorney tried to paint my parents as victims of circumstance, people who'd made mistakes but didn't deserve to have their lives destroyed. But then the evidence started. Day after day, witness after witness, document after document. The prosecution built a mountain of proof, so high that my parents' lawyers looked physically exhausted trying to climb it. Martin's testimony was the turning point. He took the stand with quiet dignity and told his story without drama or embellishment. Just the facts. How he'd been called into a meeting. How they'd presented evidence of theft. How he'd protested his innocence. How no one had believed him. "I lost my job," he said, his voice steady, but his hands trembling. "I lost my savings fighting the charges. I lost my wife because she couldn't handle the shame. I lost my children's respect because they grew up thinking their father was a criminal. I lost 20 years of my life because two people decided I was expendable." When the defense attorney cross-examined him, trying to suggest he was motivated by revenge, Martin simply said, "I'm motivated by truth. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to listen to it." The jury was riveted. Then came the financial experts, walking through the money trail with charts and spreadsheets and undeniable proof that my parents had stolen the funds and hidden them in accounts they'd opened immediately after leaving the company. Then the email evidence, recovered from old servers, showing my father discussing the problem and the solution, the problem being the theft discovery, the solution being framing Martin. And finally, the recording I'd made. My parents' own panicked voices, discussing hiding evidence, terrified that I knew the truth. I watched my mother's face as the recording played. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, I saw something that might have been shame. My father just stared ahead, blank and defeated. On the 5th day of trial, something unexpected happened. My mother took the stand. Her lawyer had advised against it. I could see it in his face, but she'd insisted. And the moment she started talking, I understood why. She was going to blame my father. "He made me do it," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to, but he said we deserved that money. He said Edward Hale owed us for years of underpaid work. He said Martin would be fine, that he'd land on his feet." The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. My father's face went white with rage. Rebecca cross-examined her with the precision of a scalpel. "Mrs. Grant, are you saying you were coerced?" He pressured me. He was controlling. "Were you forced to open these bank accounts?" Rebecca slid documents across. "The ones in your name only? The ones your husband couldn't access?" My mother faltered. That was different. "Were you forced to transfer money into those accounts? To create these shell companies? To sign these documents?" Silence. "Mrs. Grant, you weren't a victim. You were a partner. And now you're trying to save yourself by destroying your husband, just like you destroyed Martin Reyes." My mother broke down on the stand, sobbing. And suddenly, she wasn't scary anymore. She was just pathetic. My father's lawyer tried to do damage control, but the damage was done. The jury had seen my mother try to betray her partner in crime, and it made them both look worse. The trial lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of evidence, testimony, cross-examination, and watching my parents' lies unravel thread by thread. When both sides rested, the jury deliberated for 6 hours. I waited in Patricia's office, unable to eat, barely able to breathe. Marcus brought me tea I didn't drink. Patricia worked on other cases but kept her phone where she could see it. When the call came, we rushed back to the courthouse. The jury filed in. I searched their faces for clues but found none. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor." My heart hammered so hard I thought everyone could hear it. "On the count of embezzlement, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of fraud?" "Guilty." "On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud?" "Guilty." "On the count of obstruction of justice?" "Guilty." All counts. Every single one. My mother collapsed into her chair, sobbing. My father sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. Martin, sitting in the front row, put his head in his hands and cried, not from grief, but from relief so profound it overwhelmed him. I felt nothing. Or everything. I couldn't tell which. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks out and dismissed the court. As they led my parents away, my mother looked at me one last time. No hatred this time. Just emptiness. "We're still your parents," she whispered as she passed. "Help us." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt the final thread between us snap. "You are parents in name only," I said quietly. And I walked out into the sunlight. Outside, reporters swarmed again, but I was ready this time. "Ms. Grant, how do you feel about the verdict?" I stopped, turned to face the cameras, and spoke clearly. "I feel like justice was served. Not revenge. Justice. My parents made choices that destroyed lives. Martin Reyes lost 20 years because of their greed. Edward Hale carried the burden of their betrayal. And I grew up in a house built on lies. The verdict today doesn't fix all of that, but it's a start. Do you regret turning them in?" "No," I said firmly. "Some things are more important than family, like truth, like integrity, like making sure people who think they're above consequences learn they're not." I walked away before they could ask more questions, Patricia and Marcus flanking me like guards. In the car, I finally let myself feel it. The grief, the relief, the exhaustion, the strange hollow ache where my family used to be. "You did the right thing," Patricia said quietly. "I know," I whispered. But it still hurts. It's supposed to, she replied. That's how you know you're still human. Sentencing day arrived with the weight of finality. I didn't have to be there, but I went anyway. I needed to see it through to the end. The courtroom felt different this time. Quieter, sadder, like even the building knew this was the conclusion of something terrible. My parents stood before the judge in their prison jumpsuits, all their polish and superiority stripped away. The judge looked at them with the kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than anger. You had opportunities to come clean, she said. You had chances to make this right. Instead, you chose to compound your crimes with more lies, more deception, and an attempt to flee justice. You destroyed a man's life to protect your own comfort. That kind of calculated cruelty deserves the full weight of the law. She sentenced my father to 15 years, my mother to 12. They would be old when they got out. Broken. Forgotten. My father accepted it in silence. My mother wept. I felt nothing but a deep, aching sadness for what could have been if they'd just chosen differently. If they'd been different people. As they were led away, I whispered goodbye to the parents I'd wanted them to be. The ones who never existed. 2 days later, I visited Edward Hale's grave. It was a simple headstone in a beautiful cemetery, surrounded by trees and quiet. I laid flowers, white roses, because they seemed right, and I sat in the grass beside him. Thank you, I said to the stone. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Thank you for trusting me with this. I hope I did it justice. I hope I made you proud. The wind rustled through the leaves, and I chose to believe it was an answer. That afternoon, I met Martin at a cafe, not the one where I'd met Edward, but a new one, bright and warm and full of possibility. The court approved your compensation claim, I told him. Full back pay, damages for emotional distress, everything. It should come through in the next month. Martin's eyes filled with tears. 20 years, he whispered. 20 years of fighting to clear my name, and it's finally done. It's done, I confirmed. And I want to help you do something with it. What's the dream, Martin? What did you always want to do? He smiled, a real smile, maybe the first I'd seen from him. I wanted to open a community center, a place for people who've been wrongly accused, who need support, who've lost everything and need help rebuilding. Then let's do it, I said. I'll invest. We'll make it happen together. His smile widened. You've already done so much. I'm just getting started, I interrupted. Edward gave me resources. I'm going to use them the way he would have wanted, to help people who need second chances. We shook hands, two survivors of the same crime, building something good from the ashes. My business was thriving. The single mothers I'd hired brought fierce dedication. The formerly incarcerated employees brought gratitude and loyalty. We weren't just successful. We were proof that doing things ethically could work. Lila was walking now, babbling in her own language, laughing at everything. She would never remember those dark days. She would grow up knowing her mother fought for what was right, even when it was hard. One evening, Sienna called. I almost didn't answer. I know you don't want to talk to me, she said, her voice small. But I need to say something. I waited. I was wrong. About everything. I chose them over you because it was easier. I told myself they couldn't really be that bad because if they were, what did that make me? But I watched the trial. I heard the evidence. And I can't pretend anymore. Silence stretched between us. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she continued. I don't deserve it. But I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I didn't help when you needed me. I closed my eyes. I appreciate you saying that. Can we try again? Someday? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Maybe, I said finally. But not now. I need time. And you need to figure out who you are when you're not defending them. I understand, she whispered. Thank you for even considering it. We hung up, and I felt the tiniest bit of hope that maybe someday we could rebuild something. Not what we had before. That was gone forever. But something new. Something honest. The foundation I established in Edward's name officially launched 6 months after the sentencing. the Edward Hale Foundation for Justice and Truth. Its mission: protecting whistleblowers, supporting the wrongfully accused, helping people who'd lost everything to fraud and corruption. Martin ran the community center branch. I oversaw the grants and support programs. And together, we helped dozens of people who were where we'd been, broken, desperate, but still fighting. The media wanted my story. Publishers offered book deals. Documentary makers called weekly. One reporter finally caught me at a foundation event. "Ms. Grant, how does it feel, having put your own parents in prison?" I'd been asked this 100 times. But this time, I had the right answer. "I didn't put them there," I said calmly. "Their choices did. I just made sure those choices had consequences. That's not revenge. That's justice." "Do you ever regret it?" I looked at Lila, playing with other children in the Foundation's child care center. I looked at Martin, laughing with a wrongfully accused man he was helping. I looked at the life I'd built from the ruins of my family. "No," I said honestly. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they were the people they were. But I don't regret fighting for the truth." That night, I stood on my penthouse balcony, holding Lila as the city lights sparkled below us. She was getting heavy, growing so fast, but I held her tight anyway. "See all those lights?" I whispered to her. "Each one is someone's life, someone's story. Some of them are struggling like we did. Some of them are thriving like we are now. And some of them are making choices, good ones or bad ones, that will echo through years they can't even imagine." Lila patted my cheek with her tiny hand, not understanding but listening anyway. "I want you to know something," I continued. "Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them. It's about who holds you when you're broken and celebrates when you're whole. Your family isn't your grandparents. They made their choice. Your family is the people who love you, who protect you, who teach you that integrity matters more than comfort." The wind picked up, cool and fresh, carrying the promise of change. "We made it, little one," I whispered. "We made it through the darkness. And we'll never be powerless again." I looked out at the city one more time, at the vast tapestry of lights and lives and possibilities. Somewhere out there, my parents sat in prison cells, paying for their choices. Somewhere out there, Martin was building a new life from the ruins of the old. Somewhere out there, people who'd been wronged were finding their voices, speaking their truths, refusing to be silenced. And here, on this balcony, I stood with my daughter, free from the weight of lies, free from the burden of family that never deserved the name. The camera would pull back if this were a movie, wide angle, showing the city, showing possibility, showing hope. But this wasn't a movie. This was my life. Hard won, honestly built, and finally mine. I kissed Lila's forehead and whispered one last time. "We're going to be okay. Better than okay. We're going to be extraordinary." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice, redemption, and the families we choose when blood isn't enough.